Good afternoon, everyone. It's Will Booth here from DNA Business Management Solutions. I welcome you to our Lunch and Learn webinar today. It's focused on web-based timesheet, leave, expense, entry, purchase, procurement through a tool called Norming Resource Manager. And I'm very happy to have with us today Robert Lavery from Robert Lavery and Associates. He represents the norming products among many others of the key add-ons for Sage 300. And I just want to let you know we are recording today's session, so I'll be sending it out after, and we can, you can review it or share it with people on your side if there's others that want to watch it. If you do have, let me just share my screen here, and then I'll hand it over to Rob to get started on the presentation. So I'm just gonna share my screen. Can you see my screen okay, Rob?
Yes.
Excellent. Let me just start the slideshow. So if you have any questions today with what Rob's going through, I'm going to have everybody on mute, but you're certainly welcome to put them in there's a Q&A window and there's a chat as well. I'll be monitoring both. And if I think it's a good point to ask Rob during the presentation, I'll ask him, but I'll also write them down and we'll have them at the end. So as I said, today, DNA is presenting Norming Resource Manager and focused a lot on their web portal and mobile capabilities to have employees enter time and expenses and approvals. Rob's going to go over a quick overview of the product and features and then get into the demo, and then we'll just have QA at the end. There's a lot of areas to cover, so it'll probably take us close to 50 minutes with questions. We have the whole hour, so if there's lots of questions, we'll keep answering. And as I said, we are recording this and we'll share it after. And if you do have any questions after the event, then you can email me or just email sales@da.ca. I should have put that email there as well. And you can call the office and Mike and I can help you with that. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rob. Rob, I'm going to make you the presenter here.
All right. Thank you, Will.
And as I do that, so Rob's worked in the Sage 300 community for longer than he probably wants to admit. He's an accountant. He's worked for Sage, but the last more than 10 years, he's been representing many of the key third-party products for Sage 300. And norming software is one of those. They have many components, fixed assets tool that does fixed asset tracking, fixed asset accounting, of course, maintenance and leasing. And another great solution from Norming is the Resource Manager tool. So that's really what Rob's going to focus today. And I see your Norming logo, so I think we're sharing screens great. So I'm going to let you go, Rob.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Will. And thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. We really appreciate your time and attention, and we hope that you'll find the content of today's presentation very useful and practical for your organizations. So as Will mentioned, we're going to be focusing on Resource Manager. And what we want to do is give you an idea of how Resource Manager is positioned within the Sage 300 marketplace. And if you think about CRM creates a web portal for sales and marketing people who aren't typically in Sage 300, but might need to access information about your customers, about sales activities, about the sales people within your organization. And they need to be able to see that whether it's through a web portal or on a mobile device, and possibly even add information into the CRM system that ultimately finds its way into Sage 300. But we don't want sales and marketing people touching our Sage 300 data, because as accountants, we're very protective about that information, because it's an important set of data that we maintain to manage and control the decision-making process within the organization. So Resource Manager is similar in the sense that it creates an employee portal for operations or other types of people, possibly sales and marketing people as well. And it integrates that directly into Sage 300 without having to log into Sage 300. So again, we're protecting the integrity and the privacy of the information that's stored within Sage 300, but allowing non-accounting, non-finance employees to be able to access information that's part of Sage 300 and in fact create transactions that once they are properly approved, get set up as a transaction within Sage 300. So in essence, it's an employee portal for Sage 300. And you access that portal one of two ways. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see the traditional web portal, which is a Java-based application that you access on a computer, which is what I'll be doing today, or on a tablet. And on the right-hand side, the mobile apps that are native to the Apple operating system, the Android operating system, so that people will be able to use mobile devices to access the same type of functionality that you can through the web portal. And all of the information on the web is integrated into a traditional back office application that we call Resource Manager. So the Resource Manager back office application installs into the Sage 300 environment, whether that's your classic Windows desktop, which is what you see here, or the new web-based screens that are part of the Sage 300 cloud solution. Now, when we talk about Resource Manager, here are the key benefits as a customer or potential customer of Resource Manager. It's an all-in-one solution, fully integrated into Sage 300 that allows you to record in real time the submission, tracking, and approval of different types of transactions. You can incorporate workflow approvals to ensure that only approved transactions get set up within Sage 300. And it's at a price point that's affordable for most Sage 300 organizations. And we can get into that towards the end of the presentation, and obviously Will and his team at DNA are able to provide proposals and pricing information if you're interested. The key aspect of Resource Manager is that we've created a platform to access multiple facets of an organization, from e-purchasing to accounts payable, time management, expense reporting. Those of you that use the PJC module, there's project management, there's other requests through what we call custom requisitions or miscellaneous information such as publishing pay stubs to the employee portal. We're going to be focusing today on the expenses, time management, and the e-purchasing aspects. But just so you know, there's a complete set of functionality across different operational areas within organizations, depending on what your requirements are and what your particular organization needs. So I want to start with an overview of the expense tracking, and I'm going to walk you through a couple of slides. I typically don't use a lot of PowerPoint in my presentations, but because we've got so much content to cover today, I want to give you a framework through the PowerPoint slides, and I'm going to flip over to the applications and show you how they work. And also so that you're aware that there is a PowerPoint slide deck available that we'll make available through DNA Management. So if you'd like a copy of the slides, please just request them from Will, and he'll be more than happy to send them to you. So expense tracking, what are we trying to accomplish here? Well, those of you that have people that are traveling and need to submit expense reports, we want you to be able to record these expenses as they happen through a mobile app or through the web portal, so that you can start recording without having to rekey or send paper to the head office for someone else to rekey the information to Sage 300 for reimbursement purposes. So to that end, we support the expenses through file attachments that can be any type of file, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, a PDF document, a JPEG image, a Word doc. It really doesn't matter to us. Any file format is supported. And you can build in some controls in addition to the standard workflow approvals. You can add things like limit checking to make sure that people are not spending more than their per diems on a daily, monthly, or annual basis. For those expense codes that are used on a common basis, we can auto insert those when you create a new expense report, and you'll see that in today's presentation. As often as we can, we like to limit the keystrokes that employees have to use in order to record the information. And for those of you that are in service-based businesses or project-oriented organizations, we support billable, non-billable, as well as the reimbursable expenses. So you're actually able to turn around and bill these expenses back to clients if you're doing professional services that incur expenses. And there are some built-in reports with Resource Manager that give you a summary of these expenses by period, by type, by employee. And the reimbursement process can go through accounts payable or payroll. In today's presentation, I'm going to do that through accounts payable. Now, as I mentioned, there will be a browser-based entry and approval form in the web, and this was also available through the mobile app, which is what your employees will use. And then that will feed or create an expense entry batch within Sage 300 so that you can record the transactions for accounting purposes, but then also have backup for the reimbursements that you're doing. The reimbursements, as I mentioned, can be through AP or payroll, and we've also added a separate payment entry function within Resource Manager. So think of it much like a manual check process within Sage 300, where if you're not creating an AP invoice off the expense report for reimbursement through AP, you can reimburse through a manual check option within Resource Manager. So let's go over to the Resource Manager application. And so what you're seeing here is the back office component of Resource Manager. And I want to touch on just a couple of things here to give you some familiarity with the overall functionality, and then we'll walk through an expense report process for you. So as I mentioned, this is an employee-centric web portal. In order to do that, we have to set up our employees within the system, and we have some basic information about who the employee is, the division, the department that they're working for here on the processing page, who their supervisor is, which generally will be their direct report. And then for expense purposes, we have an expense control page where we can list out the expense codes that are recorded on the expense reports, the GL distribution, and the limits that we talked about. And those limits can either be a warning where we let people know that they're going over a limit, but it will still let them pass through that warning message. Or you can set it with an error condition, which means the error message will pop up and it won't allow them to continue or submit that expense because it's gone over a particular limit. So you can build in these controls in addition to the workflow approvals that we'll be talking about in just a moment. Notice that these limits can be a dollar amount or a quantity. So if you're concerned about mileage claims going over the 5,000 kilometer limit on an annual basis, you can set that up in the system as well. And the auto insert that I mentioned, you'll see how the expense codes that I've listed as auto insert yes, we'll be able to record those automatically to a new expense form. Likewise, you're going to see through time management and the other workflows that we can assign these at an individual employee level, or we can do that at a group level. So you don't have to do this kind of a setup for every individual employee if it's not required. And for those of you that are using project and job cost, you can record the employee as a resource to a PJC job, which means expenses can be allocated to PJC projects at a contract phase category level. But once we've set up the employee, the expense codes, as we've talked about, are going to need to be created as well. And as I mentioned, these expense codes set up the distribution to the GL account, so the employees don't have to know what GL accounts these expenses are being allocated to. but you can set them up to define a specific base account, but also if you've departmentalized the GL, these expenses can automatically go to a department, division, or region that that employee belongs to. And notice that we can set up the limit as a monthly, daily, or year-to-date basis. And we can also flag these expenses as reimbursable, or they may be a corporate credit card expense, which means they're not reimbursable to the employee, and you can flag the expense that way. The currency is supported if you've turned on multi-currency within Sage 300, so we can incur expenses in any currency and also reimburse in any currency as well. And we often get questions about the taxes and how taxes pertain to these expense codes. We're linking directly into tax services within Sage 300. So depending on the provinces or territories that the employees are traveling to, you can set up appropriate tax jurisdictions for things like GST on meals based on the provincial tax authority that applies in each province or territory. The billing rate is there if you need to bill back these expenses to clients, and we also support optional fields and notes against these expenses that will automatically apply to the employee's expense report. So before I go through, I just want to also highlight the approval workflows. So you will see how for every type of document in the system, whether it's an expense report, a timesheet, a leave request, overtime, the purchase requisitions that we'll talk about, or AP invoices if you're not using the PO module, or even budget requests and other travel requests, all of these are controlled through approval workflows, where you can define who participates within the workflow, which is defined by our roles. And these roles, as you saw within the employee register, can be the employee supervisor. But if you've turned on the region, division, or department functionality, you can also assign an approval workflow to their managers. Again, with PJC, you have different project types. We also use the concept of an approver group. So if you want to say that the expense needs to be approved by 2 out of a group of 4 managers, then you can specify that approver group as part of the workflow. And as long as 2 of the managers within the group approve the expense report, it will be able to be set up within Sage 300. We also give you custom roles that you can define specific criteria for the person that needs to participate within the workflow. Now, the other thing I want to highlight for you is what we call a decision process. The decision process allows us to add additional business logic to the approval workflow so that if you wanted to add something like dollar value thresholds, you can specify what those dollar value thresholds are, like you see here in the bottom of the screen. And this allows you to route the expense report or any other document like a purchase request to the appropriate person based on the value of the expense or the purchase that's being made. So in this case, it might be that if the expenses are less than $200, we don't need an approval. But if it's between 200 and 500, we need at least 1 level of approval. And if they're greater than $500, then we might need 2 or 3 levels of approval, or maybe a different person approving at a higher level within the organization. So it could also be based on the nature of the expense that's being incurred, and we can put these conditions as additional criteria or parameters for how we want that workflow approval to work. Because the goal will be to try to create a master workflow that can handle different kinds of expense routing and approvals based on the types of expense reports that are being allowed in the system. Notice that we use email as an alert function, and this is true again for all the documents that we process within Resource Manager. So when we submit, reject, or approve these documents, we can automatically send out email notification. And so we give you an email template that allows you to specify the wording that you want in the body of the email. So as expense reports are being approved, you can identify the employee name, who the approver was, and the document or the expense report number that was approved. If it was rejected, you might take advantage of the notes feature that you saw with the expense code setup, where you can say a particular expense was not allowed because of certain rules that were violated or policies that weren't met. And then when we submit, we have a submission reminder for the managers, and there's a URL link in the body of the email because we've got the ability to access the expense reports through a web portal, whether that's in the mobile app or through the standard web portal that we run in a browser. So this allows us to create automated, paperless, efficient expense reporting processes through the use of approval workflows, the web portal and mobile app capability, and the email templates as notification and alert capabilities. So now let's walk through a particular expense report process. And to do this, I'm going to use the web portal. Again, we could be using mobile apps that you can download free of charge once you've licensed the portal within Sage 300 and Resource Manager. So when I log in as an employee, it will give you the ability to choose whether I'm logging into a particular company or not, and it will verify the ID and the password as being correct or not. So if I log in incorrectly, I can either use an employee name or number, and I don't have the appropriate password, then it will not allow me to log into the system. It will also verify the company that I want to be recording these expenses against. And as part of the back office configuration, you assign employees to the various Sage 300 companies that you've got configured. When I log into the system, I can see historical information about previous expense reports that I've submitted. Also various statuses, whether I've got approved, awaiting approval, rejected, or even open expenses that I haven't yet submitted into the workflow approval. When I click on the new button, it presents a brand new expense form, and here's where you see the auto insert for some of the expense codes that I'm allowed to enter into the system. And so I could use the per diem amounts, or I could say, actually, I'm going to spend $450 on airfare because I'm going to a conference in Chicago. And then the hotel might have been $360, and that was the Hilton Hotel in Rosemont, we'll say. And then the mileage, I'm going to leave that as 0. If I leave an expense line as 0, it will automatically be removed by the system. And then let's say it was $45 to go from the airport to the hotel. And now for all of these expense lines on the expense report, I might want to start adding receipts. So if I click on the hotel line, I can say this is the Hilton Hotel, and I would browse to pick up the information that I want to attach. So I'm going to go to my downloads and pick up a, let's go back here to 2019, and I'm going to pick up a folio, and I'm going to save that as my hotel bill. And then I might have had an airfare receipt, so I'm going to click there as well. This is my airfare receipt. And of course, on a mobile device, you would take a picture of this and attach the picture if you want. So you've got all these different options for what you want to show as your particular supporting document for the particular line of expense on the report. So these are now attachments to the expense report that will be visible by the approvers when they are going through the approval process. Notice as well that we could import a credit card file if we had credit card expenses, and we can also calculate the tax based on the tax jurisdiction, or we could add the tax as an entry into the system. Also, optional fields are supported. So let's go ahead and save this expense report. I could check the limits to make sure that I'm not going over any of my limits based on an expense limit or a GL account limit. So I do have budget checking and control And notice that if I have set up limits for the various periods, it will tell me what I've already spent during the month, what's pending on other expense reports versus what's available, and then show me what this expense report is going to be recording as expenses. When I submit the expense report, it's validating the information on the expense report against information in Sage 300. So in this case, the task code is not valid. So I need to go in and make sure that I'm using a valid task code in this case. And so that's just verifying that even though I'm not logged into Sage 300, it's still looking at the information that's within Sage 300 to make sure that I'm not putting bad data into the accounting system. So now I'm going to go ahead and submit, and you notice that I get the warning about the budget because I'm going over my period limit. But because it's just a warning and not an error, I can continue through that, and it will submit this expense report into the workflow, and then it will show me the approval trail that Bruce, my manager, has to do the approver, or actually Bruce is my supervisor. But you notice that depending on the nature of the expense, I have created a workflow in the system that could either go to the supervisor and then end, directly to the regional manager and end, or to a specific employee. So the system will actually flow chart the workflow that you create within the system. Notice as well that we have substitute users. So we can substitute another person while we're away on vacation to take care of our approvals while we're out of town or unavailable. And the approval trail is visible, as I say, throughout the approval process. So now I'm going to log out as myself, and I'm going to log in as the manager, Bruce. And Bruce would get an email notification on his smartphone, or there's a to approved list within the portal that will also highlight documents that the manager needs to approve. There's the expense voucher number 40 that I submitted today, September the 29th. I can click on that link. I can see the details of the expenses that need to be approved. I can also see the information for the airfare and the hotel. So by clicking on the document, I can see the information that's been recorded and supporting the entry for the hotel expense. Likewise, the airfare that I've recorded, and you can see the information as you're doing the approval. Now, you might be wondering why the lines are highlighted. When you configure Resource Manager, you can also say that you want to do approvals at a line level or the document level. If it's at a line level, then it's possible that one of the expense lines might need to go to a different approver, either because of the amount or the nature of the expense. So the system will be smart enough to actually split the expense report and send one line to one manager and the other two to another manager. You could also, if the nature of the expenses are very unique, you can do an ad hoc change to the approval workflow and move an approval to an additional manager. So that's through the transfer function. But in our case, I'm just going to go ahead and approve these expenses. And because there's just one level of approval, as soon as these expenses are approved through the portal, what happens to them? They automatically end up within Sage 300. So when I look at my expense batch transactions within Sage 300, EV40 has now been set up as a transaction batch with today's date, September the 29th. So I can open up this transaction batch now. It's going to be flagged as an approved expense report batch. And then I'll be able to post that up to AP for reimbursement. So there's EV40. And the details that I had from within the portal will all be visible through this expense report. So my airfare, my hotel, and my taxi, and you notice the mileage is not here. As I mentioned, because that was a zero line, it automatically removed the zero value expense report. The amounts are shown here, the fact that they're billable, the division and region that they pertain to, the GL expense account. Now, we always give the accountants the final say. So if for some reason we needed to change the expense account for the GL distribution, we could do that. And we notice that the attachments are here as well. So I've got the file name and the attachments are visible as well through the back office. So by clicking on preview, the same document that I attached in the portal to this expense report is also visible here through the expense reporting function in Resource Manager. So the approval trail is also recorded. I can see with a date and a timestamp who submitted and who approved these expenses. I can see the totals with any recoverable tax, the optional fields, the breakdown of the taxes that apply, and the document details. I also still have the budget information. So from a finance and accounting perspective, I can see the limit for this month, what's pending on this expense report, and what's available. So all of that is visible. And then if I'm okay with this, I want to go ahead and post the expense entry, and this will generate the AP invoice, which we're going to use for reimbursement purposes. So just to close the loop on this transaction, I'll go up to AP, show you the expense, and then we'll move over to do the timesheet entry and approval. So there's an expense batch that's been created, and I believe it may be, let's see, I've got a couple here. So this one is open. I'll see if this is the one where the expense got set up. And remember, it was EV40 that was set up. So I'll go to the last entry within this batch. And there's the expense. Notice that the document number matches with the expense number. So we've got an audit trail connection. The GL account distribution for the expenses have been set up as AP. And we also support drill down. So if I drill from the AP invoice entry screen, I can go back into the Resource Manager expense entry screen and see the details of that transaction. So if you wanted to get support, you can go back and see the approval audit trail and the attachments that support the document details for the expense. So that's our expense reimbursement process using Resource Manager, the web portal, and the integration to Sage 300. Once the expenses were recorded and approved, we no longer needed to rekey any of that information. So now the next part of the presentation, I'm going to move over to a different company that's got Canadian payroll and PJC. And what we want to show here is timesheet approval. So again, we're going to be using an approval workflow, but in this case, we're going to be linking to timesheets. And we also have the ability to track leave. So we have leave account history, where we're recording information about employee or leave codes. And we can see by employee information about annual leave and the history of people taking vacation and whether there's any carryover. Or we can go by the leave code. And in this case, we've got two leave codes. We've got annual leave and sick leave. We can see who's taken sick days, and if they've taken sick days, when they were, and any comments. So there is leave tracking incorporated with Resource Manager timesheets. There's also an attendance module that we'll talk about in just a minute, and then the overtime bank, which allows you to cash and bank overtime. So to do that, let me just flip back to the PowerPoint, and we'll walk you through an overview of the attendance, timesheet, and leave, and then do the transaction. So with the mobile apps, we also have the ability to clock in and clock out with an attendance module that also supports geofencing or a GPS tracking capability on the mobile application. This will support multi-location punches, lunch breaks, and an attendance summary report, and also a missed punch request feature that will ask the employee to send notification to their manager if they missed punching in, so that they get approval for the day's work. Again, we've got the back office configuration through the attendance feature, where we have shift codes and shift schedules with shift groups. And then with the mobile apps, we have the ability to clock in and clock out with a date and a timestamp, and the missed punch requests that you can see on the right-hand side. And this will give you their location and the time to ensure that they're actually on the job site or where they're supposed to be as they're doing their work. This will populate information about their in-out times from the mobile device, their location, and their actual device, so we can verify that it's their device that's recording the information. So now let's pop back to the application. And I don't really want to spend too much more time on the configuration. We've covered that, I believe, in enough detail. So let's sign out, and I will sign in as another employee, this time Marilyn. And you'll see now we've got Marilyn allocated to several Sage 300 companies. So we're going to allocate this timesheet to our PJC and Canadian payroll company. And I'll move through this fairly quickly because we've already talked about the foundation of how the approval workflows work, attaching documents and so forth. Notice that we do have a leave web where we can see how many sick days are left, how many leave days are left. And then I've got a history of what I've taken so far, and I can add a new request if I wanted to take a day off or I need to record sick time. I'm going to go ahead and just do a new timesheet, and the timesheet is going to be allocated to the current period, but I could also backdate the timesheet to a previous period. So let's say last week I forgot to enter my timesheet. Because we're integrated to PJC, you notice that the project phase task category information is also part of the timesheet. And so as I set up information for this employee and the jobs they've been working on, we will also be able to assign the phase. Now, when we add norming projects to PJC, we also get what's called a WBS, or a work breakdown structure. So we can actually have 4 levels of detail on our projects if we want to. And then we can assign the appropriate task, the appropriate category, whether it's billable to the client. And we can also record the hourly time, but also the leave tracking for sick time, or we can enter overtime or have the system calculate overtime for us. I'll just put in comment, nice customer. And then this is our standard timesheet where we can say to do a lot of work. You can add these comments for every day. And on the standard time, it just puts in a little blue asterisk there. So those comments will be recorded and visible as well during the approval process. And when we use the standard time, we're just entering the number of hours. But as you saw with the attendance, I could clock in or clock out. And if I use the standard timesheet, I have a punch in and punch out. So with attendance, it's clock in, clock out. With the timesheet, it's punch in, punch out. But all of those are valid entries. But this is just using the standard. And then of course I could add an attachment. And here again, let's say I wanted to put in the contract details. I could do that and browse. And I'm going to go back here to a suspense folder, put in the executed contract and save that. So I might have that information as part of the information that I've put to support the entries on my timesheet. Now, if I'm using the scheduling tool, I can create timesheets off of a schedule where I'm assigned to particular jobs or projects, and it will know what work I'm doing and how many hours I'm assigned, and it will create the timesheet off the schedule, or I can copy a timesheet from a previous period if I want to do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and submit. And again, the approval audit trail will be presented. And so in this case, Freddie has to do my approval for the timesheet, and I will log out as Marilyn. So the substitution feature that we talked about, just to highlight that quickly, you can substitute entry or approval for a specific time frame. So I could say I'm going to be away on vacation from the 29th to the 6th of October, and I could have other managers do my approvals, or I could have people entering transactions on my behalf through this substitution feature. So just thought I'd highlight that for you. The other thing we can do is we can customize the home page, and I'll give you an example of that when we go to the purchase requisition. But you see, you can select or deselect any of the options that you see denoted by these tiles through the web portal. So now I'm going to log out as Marilyn, and I'm going to sign in as Freddie. And the main purpose of this part of the demo is just to highlight not only the approval process, but the integration of timesheets into PJC and Canadian payroll. So I've got a to approved list here with the timesheet number 40 that we set up today, September 29th. So I click on that timesheet, I can see the attachment, I can see the time that's been allocated. I notice there's a comment here, need to do a lot of work, and the note, nice customer. Again, I have the transfer option if I wanted another manager to review the timesheet, but I'm just going to go ahead and approve, say okay, and then I'm going to be able to move this out of the approval console. It's now set up as a timesheet batch within Resource Manager. And just like we saw with the expenses, it's set up the entry for today. It's noted as coming from the employee self-service portal, and the details can be reviewed as a back office function by the accounting and finance team. But the point here again is that we've recorded the transaction through the portal, it's been properly approved, and only then does it end up in Sage 300. And you can see that pay period has been recorded against the employee who set up the timesheet entry. Again, the approval audit trail with a date and time stamp comments, the attachments that are visible here in the back office, any optional fields, and the document details. And we've allocated to the pay code and the shift code that applies for payroll purposes, and the note that's here, and then the comment that we had is also recorded, as well as the pay rate and the approved hours. So all that information's been captured. Now I just need to go ahead and post. And this is integrated to both PJC and payroll. So we're going to be creating a time card entry within PJC, as well as the payroll time card. So if I move over to PJC, you will see how the time card entry has been updated with timesheet 40 for September. So there's timesheet 40 with the details, and then the time detail gives me a breakdown for the days September 17 to 23. It's recorded as billable, the earnings flag for hourly, the unit cost, the extended cost, the payroll account has been updated, but also a work in progress on the job within PJC. So it's automatically set up the information so I don't have to rekey the time entry for costing purposes for projects. And for payroll purposes, I've got the time card entry for Marilyn set up in Canadian payroll as well. So she was employee 1020. And then her last time card entry, which was for the period ending September 23rd, has been set up with the same time details. But this is now a payroll time card, so it's assigned a new time card number, time card 25, but the same period end date of September 23rd, and the allocation to the appropriate payroll wages and benefits account. Okay, so that's how we would record timesheets through the portal, get them properly approved, and we can generate Canadian payroll time cards, PJC time cards, and of course, if you wanted to just set it up as a PJC time card, you could update payroll from PJC, but we showed it going directly from Resource Manager into PJC. And so the last part of the presentation is going to be using a company that's set up to do purchase requisitions with multi-level approvals based on dollar value thresholds. So in this case, the approval workflow we're using is going to be set up to do a multi-level approval, as I mentioned. And you can see here that we can create some very complex approvals. And so to highlight that, I'm going to show you the decision action. So we have 5 different levels of threshold and actually 6 approval levels for the different types of purchases. And notice that we have the condition of dollar value threshold, but we also can itemize the criteria based on the category of the item that's being purchased. We can also incorporate budget controls into the workflow approval. So this is the approval that we're going to be using for the purchase requisitions. But again, let me jump back quickly to the PowerPoint and just highlight a couple of things that I want to cover that I'm not able to show completely as part of the presentation today. So we call this Resource Manager ePurchasing, and we can assign requisition requests and approvals at all 3 levels of purchase orders within Sage 300. So at the PO level, the PO receipt, or the PO invoice. You can do all 3 or any combination. And again, it's highlighted as these 3 tiles on the web portal, but it's also available in the mobile app. And we also have request for quote capability. We can control purchasing against PJC estimates and budgets. We support blanket purchase orders. You can create flexible PO numbering rules. We can approve purchase requests by items or documents. So again, line item detail or document totals. There's an endorse feature if you want to create a vendor catalog with your preferred vendors, and tax amounts can also be calculated as part of the purchase requisition process. We've added the capability of over receipt checking as well. So when you're configuring the purchase types you want to use in the web portal, you can specify a threshold by dollar or by quantity by which you want to over receive against a PO. Now this is added functionality that you can't do within the standard PO module of Sage 300, but we've added this because we recognize in the real world sometimes you receive more than what's on the PO, and that's okay as long as it's properly approved. So we put in the over receipt checking as a feature within Resource Manager, and then the PO invoice requisition. So let's jump back, and this time we're going to do a purchase requisition, and I'm going to sign out, and I'm going to be Freddie again. But you'll notice that when I log in, I'm going to choose a different company. So Freddie was able to approve the timesheet in one company, and now he's in a different company raising a purchase requisition. And notice that the portal has changed. Even though it's the same employee, he's logging into a different company and he has different responsibilities in this company. So we've simplified what he sees on the web portal screen. So that's an example of customizing the home page on this web portal screen. And by the way, you can add your own company logo with a link to your web page. You can customize the color schemes here as well. So all of that is possible. And again, we can see previously posted and approved purchases, what's been approved but not posted through, what's awaiting, what's rejected, and any open POs that might have been started. Now here I want to highlight a couple of different things on the purchasing side. I want to talk about optional fields because you notice that we've added optional fields to the purchase transactions. So things like independent cost estimates need to be set up, an independent cost estimate date. We need board action item numbers, and we have a drop-down list of how we've obtained the estimate. So in addition to the standard functionality within Resource Manager, we can also incorporate optional field content from within Sage 300 to enhance the information that's being recorded in the system. I mentioned the request for quote. We can add quotes, and you can send out via email the request for quote to various vendors. And this is where you might have an endorsed or preferred vendor, and you can highlight the quotation detail. We also have the document attachments, and of course the purchase requisition details themselves. Now you have access to all the vendors within Sage 300. You can put in a date required, and you specify the different purchase types. So in this case, you can see we have a number of different purchase types that use different approval workflows or have different approval levels or different types of requirements for quotations and optional field values. So you can specify different types of purchases that are assigned to different types of buyers or purchasing agents. And this can control for you what you see within the system. I'm going to use this purchase type, and I can start entering items. And again, I want to highlight a couple of the features here as we're closing and out on our time on the webinar today. So if I specify a particular item, I can just choose from a drop-down list of items within inventory control. And I can also add a link to a web page. So I could put in staples.ca, and then that becomes a hyperlink to the staples.ca website. So if I'm using a web catalog, I can put a link to the web catalog right in the line item detail for the item that I want to buy at Staples. and then specify the location details and the quantity. And let's say that I want to buy 10 of those items. And because it's a stock item, you notice I can see what's on hand and what's on PO and what's on other purchase requests. And that it gives me the unit cost detail. But if I want to add another line and it's a non-stock, or I want to do a fuzzy logic search, let's say I know it's something to do with a desk, but I can't remember exactly what the code was. So I put in desk lamp and it filters that for me so I can isolate the item I want to buy. So it does a stock item, a non-stock item. It also does a non-inventory item. If I wanted to add something, let's say I want to get myself a new Jaguar, I can enter in a Jaguar SUV and record that as an item. And you notice there is no quantity on hand because it's non-inventory and there's no unit price. So I would have to add that unit price into the purchase requisition. So all of that to say that it's an extremely flexible purchase requisition system. But now to streamline the entry, I could import from the catalog or I can copy from a previous requisition that I've used. So I'm going to grab this requisition and say OK, and it populates the details for the items, the website links, the quotation details. So if I look at the quotation detail, I can see here's the two vendors and the criteria. One was more expensive, this was the best price. So that was the vendor we chose, $18.90. And then same thing for the Jaguar, the quotation detail and the criteria that we used. And then if I wanted to request a quote, I could save the document and send it out. And I also have the quotation check feature and the budget feature to see how we're doing against a particular account or budget. So all of this is possible as I'm setting up, and notice the details on what's required to fill in the optional fields. And then I would attach some documents. So let's say I want to attach the Jaguar. So let me go back to the purchase requisition line item detail here, and I'll attach the Jaguar SUV, and it's an F-Pace. And then I browse and pick up the Jaguar details, which was this. And then for the desk lamp, let's say that was, I'm just going to grab a PDF for that, or no, a JPEG in this case. So I'm going to go to a picture and I'll just drag in the picture details for my desk lamp and save. Okay. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and submit. And I've met the criteria and I now have the approval trail. So Richard is going to do that. Now you see the full path here. I've got department heads, senior staff. I've got board level, grant administration. This is a more complex workflow because I've got all those different purchase types that I want to be able to support with different levels of approval, just to highlight again the fact that you can create very complex workflows as you need. So what I want to do is I want to move over to the first approver, which is Richard. And I want to log into this company database. And I've got multiple documents to approve, but the purchase requisition we're interested in is PR42, the one we just did right now. And again, I can see quotation details. I can see the optional field information as to how they obtain the cost estimate, the attachments, and the purchase requisition details, how I'm doing against budget. I'm going to go ahead and approve this. Say OK. Now, I know this is a multi-level approval, and notice that I've used a group. So I still have another approval level here for Richard, but I'm going to log out as Richard and sign in as Carl. And that's just because Richard's also part of the same approver group. So we move it over to Carl, and PR42 is here for Carl to review and approve. There it is. So again, he can see all the same details. I'm just going to go ahead and approve. So this time we've done 2 levels of approval, and then we set up the purchase requisition in Sage 300. So when I go to the purchase requisition list, I see PR42, as my last purchase requisition. There it is. And I'm just going to review the details very quickly with you, and then we'll move it over to PO, and I'm going to highlight one more aspect of the purchase transaction for you. So you can see here that the details for the desk lamp and the Jaguar came across. The budget information is here, the attachments, but I've also got them here as part of Document Management Link. Why would you want to use Document Management Link when you have the attachments with Resource Manager? Because when I move this transaction and post it over to Sage 300 PO, it's going to create a PO number for me that I can then attach and see all the details within the PO module. So I've created a purchase order within Sage 300 that will relate back to PR 42. So I also want to highlight the audit trail that is being supported here. So when I look at my PO entry, there's PO 59, there's the reference back to PR 42, and because Document Management Link has been integrated to both Resource Manager and purchase orders, I can see the requisition details and what was bought, but then I can now assign the PO number, and I could add the PO from my suspense folder. So I could save the PO, print it, and I'll just grab this as an example and rename it to PO 59. Let's say 059. And then that's attached as a PO support. Why would I want to do that? Because then when I post the PO, I won't print it. I can then see all these details as I receive an invoice against the PO. So you're going to have a complete audit trail. You've approved the purchase within Sage 300, or sorry, through Resource Manager, and then PO 59, and all the details are here, and it references back to the original purchase request that was part of Resource Manager and the approval audit trail. And you've got supporting documentation for every step of the purchase approval process, and then the receipt and the invoice. And you could either have an approval in Resource Manager for PO receipt or PO invoice, or just stick with the PO level approval, but you would have all the supporting documentation for these items that were purchased and a link back to the original purchase request number in Resource Manager. So I'm going to end it there, Will. I want to thank everyone for your time. Now would be appropriate if you have any questions, be more than happy to address them for you.
So thank you, Rob. That it's always amazing to see this tool and all the features that it can provide our clients. So Rob, can you see the questions window there, or do you want me to read them out?
I should be able to see them here. Okay, hi, bonjour. Okay. No, I don't actually see those. I just see the chat, but I'm not actually seeing the questions.
Okay, so give me one sec. I will read them out because I just moved them and now they're, where did they go here? Oh, they're up at the top. So the first question is, let me pull this down. It says the mobile app for expenses is okay, but do you anticipate any updates in the near future? So is Norman continuing to add features to the mobile app? Was one question.
Absolutely. Every release, we add more features to the mobile app. In fact, in October, we've got an update to the mobile apps. So it would behoove you, if you're a current customer, to download the latest mobile app. And if you let Will know, there is a new download for the mobile apps coming out in October.
Yeah, okay, great. So that's the first question. The AP invoice requisition module is great from an administrator's standpoint, but it creates more work for the users as they are required to input invoice details. Do you have any feedback from clients about this? Does that make sense, Rob?
Yes. So what they're referring to is the fact that what you're doing is you're offloading some of the work for AP invoice entry through the portal rather than the folks in accounting entering invoices. And that's just the nature of what we're trying to do by creating remote access to non-Sage 300 users. So by design, what we're hoping to do is spread the data entry to people that wouldn't typically enter. But what we find is that they're now motivated to make sure that invoices are getting in and properly approved, so that accounting doesn't have to chase people down to find out what the AP invoice is for. There's now an audit trail that it's been submitted and approved, and it's all set up in the system and automatically set up. So while it is offloading accounting entry to non-accountants, we found that in terms of the overall efficiency within the organization, it actually improves, and you've got better controls and now documented audit trails.
Right. Okay. So I think that answers that. Can the expense code be changed by AP staff after the expense has been approved by the supervisor if some expense hasn't been put in the proper category?
Yes, and if you recall, I did actually show that in the company where I was able to open the expense line detail on that expense report within Resource Manager. So yes, we do allow the entry to be modified in the back office, and that's also part of the setup options when we're creating the configuration initially, which is what DNA will do for you. Is there are basic integration functions, and there are also processing options. And with respect to the expenses, we give you an option to update or edit the expense transaction from within the back office. So you see we allow deletion on the back end, rejection, or you can also edit in the back office.
Okay, perfect. That answers that. Just a couple more here. Thanks, everybody. We'll just have a few more questions and we'll wrap up. It says for the timesheet tool, can you lock prior periods to prevent changes or late timesheet entries? How far in advance can you enter a timesheet as well? So can you lock the previous ones, and how far out in the future can you enter time?
Yes, you can close out prior periods. That's generally your fiscal calendar control within Sage 300 that we're relying on, is that you create fiscal calendar control so that people can't post timesheets to previous periods. They might change the date or the document date on the timesheet, but you wouldn't be able to post to a prior period through the fiscal calendar control of Sage 300.
Okay. And then how about in the future? Can you enter timesheets into the future?
Yes, that's also a setting within the timesheet options where you can allow future dates on the timesheet entry. That's a configuration option for you.
Okay. Okay. And so we're a little bit over time, but there was a lot to cover and some good questions. So somebody liked your picture of your Jaguar, Rob, and yes, we will send out by probably tomorrow. We'll send out an email to everybody with the recording, as well as we'll attach Rob's slides as well. He's going to send them to us, and we'll get those to you as well. The recording will also be on the DNA YouTube channel. So appreciate everybody's sticking with us. It's some great questions, some great feedback. And I am just going to take control back here, Rob. Give me one second.
All right.
And I'm going to show my screen. I can close down the questions. And let me just finish off the slideshow here, because of course it stopped. So I just wanted to say thank you, Rob, for giving us all this great information on the latest features. We'll look forward to the next update next month, and we'll be posting on our website and our newsletter some of the information. If you do have any questions or want to talk more about it or get your own demo, you can call the office or send an email to sales@da.ca, and Mike and I will answer those questions and bring Rob in as we need. We have many clients using this tool, and they thoroughly enjoy it. So thank you again, everybody, and have a great rest of your week. And you'll stand by. We'll send the recording shortly. All right. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a good day, everybody.